Well, thank you. I'm especially happy to be here because I have such a particular relationship to Turkey. So I'm very, very grateful for Eda for this invitation. And I would say, thinking together is actually redundant. We basically think that ideas are produced by human brains. It is not exactly accurate. It's the connection between human brains that actually produce ideas. So ideas are really realities that are not just popping out of our thinking, of our brain, of our inner conversation, of this inner voice that is chatting all the time in our minds. No, ideas come out of circulation. There is something that needs to go through different individuals to really happen as an idea or a concept. In Plato, it's very explicit. You need to be in dialogue so that you get rid of what is too singular in your thinking, and by exchanging little by little, it's a bit like pebbles, or stones, one against the other, little by little, they will get loose of whatever particular strange forms they have, and little by little they will become smoother. And it's the very idea of this transformation of our thinking through exchange and the circulation of ideas that is the core of philosophy. So philosophical thinking is not only one person, stopping and thinking and producing ideas that are, I would say, abstract, meaning taken away from the usual experience. The reason why it is an experience in itself is also because it is shared.
So why it's so difficult to think together?
No, it's difficult to think, it's difficult to live together. I mean, everything is difficult, Everything is difficult. Why is everything so difficult? Because we are imperfect beings. Now, what do imperfect beings do? They meet through their imperfections. It's not by chance. It's not like, too bad, you met me right in my imperfection. No, it's like the reason why we need each other is because precisely our imperfections call each other in order to improve the whole system. So each individual is a system. This system is partly incoherent, and it is so incoherent that it needs to lean on somebody else. And this is what we do permanently. We are depending on others to find some kind of balance, and through this balance, change, improve, and eventually die.
Exactly. So from here then, I just want to go a step back, and I want you to explain a bit about this interactional ethics. What is the difference between ethics and interactional ethics, and how did you end up with this as a philosopher or scholar?
Okay, it's true that I started my career as a historian of philosophy, studying mainly Spinoza and, let's say, the 17th century thinkers of Northern Europe. And of course, Spinoza is interesting because of his theory, well, because of many things, but one thing that really attracted my attention was his metaphysics and the way he looks at individuals. So in Spinoza, individuals are realities, actually they are scales. You can consider an individual as a set of movement that is actually expendable. So if you add another individual to that individual, they become another individual that is much more powerful, and so on. From then, I was working, on these kind of things. When I was in Brazil at that time, I was teaching philosophy, modern philosophy at the university, and I had to share a house. It was a beautiful house owned by an artist, a French contemporary artist, and she wanted creative people to live in that place. So I rented half of it, and the other half was a Catalan visual artist who considered he could do basically anything because this was his workshop. while I considered he shouldn't do anything because this was my house. And after several months, started a conflict that made us look at each other as the worst person on earth. And it was interesting to me and very challenging because he's a famous, worldwide famous contemporary artist, so I know he's not an idiot, but to me he was like the person I would erase from the surface of the earth. And the strange thing is that he would feel exactly the same towards me. And from this symmetry, I had the insight that idiocy is not a normal attribute. When you think someone is an idiot, maybe something is going back inside of you and making you an idiot in the very moment you judge someone as being one. So actually, it's what I have phrased in terms of idiocy has no witnesses. It only has accomplices. Because you're always part of it. So from then, so this was the first book.
So interactional ethics coming from this pain.
Yeah, exactly. I had to stop doing what I was doing, like some kind of translation. I don't remember what I was on, but I had to stop because I had the conflict in my house, It was being very serious. I mean, at some point there was threat of physical violence. So, I'm not a very strong guy, so I needed to find, and also it was for me the opportunity to really test philosophy, because literally what happened is that I flew away from this house for 2 weeks, reading Seneca all night, and Seneca is the greatest. If you've lost it, just read Seneca, because he will bring you back to something that is very clear, and he has a use of reason that I admire very much. And using Seneca, I thought I need to do this for my contemporaries. So I need to find a way to explain, to follow the same path, but for my contemporaries. So this actually, what I just described as an interaction being circular is the fundamental of what we call the complex theory. Theory of complexity stands that everything goes in circles. So the effect has an effect on its cause.
Butterfly effect, is it?
No, that's not the butterfly effect. The butterfly effect is different. It's another form of causality, which I introduced later, and it comes from the physics, or actually from the mathematics with Poincaré, and then from the physics with Konrad Lorenz. It's the idea that a little cause can have big effects, and big causes can have small effects. There is no proportion between cause and effect. So, but basically, what happened is that instead of doing history of philosophy, I began as a philosopher because I had a real problem in my life, and I wanted to test if I was capable of writing a theory that would actually help me out. And so this was the theory of idiocy being an interaction that is actually pulling you within its own idiocy. And you need to freeze the movement and to start going in the other direction to stop it from making you totally collapse. And what collapses is not one individual or the other, it's really what is going on in between them. So that was my first discovery of the interaction principle. And then I wanted to study interactions that would actually work or be happy interactions, And so my second book about interactions was called The School of Life. And it was basically a theory of what...
Sorry, the first one is this one.
Yeah.
Aptallarla ne yapmalı? It's just published. The second one hasn't published yet. Sorry. Yeah.
The second one is called The School of Life, and it's the theory of something that is actually going on tonight, which is what are interactions that produce knowledge? And the basic model we have for this is transmission. So I come, I have a knowledge, I'm a specialist, I'm an expert on interactions, for example. I come and I display this knowledge to you, and you appropriate it, and as you go back home, you got more knowledge. This model is totally wrong. It doesn't happen like this. So as a teacher, I could observe that the way it works is actually in the retroaction. What a teacher brings to the students are actually problems. We make them get interested by problems we display. And then, because of the problems, their reaction will produce knowledge. Of course, the teacher
But how do you know about reaction if there is no interaction?
No, but precisely, exactly. If you're a teacher who just reads his notes or her notes and waits for students to write, no knowledge is being transmitted.
How did you do this?
Well, in philosophy it's especially easy, you know, because the problems...
Did you ever practice it in school, in somewhere?
A lot. I think all teachers do.
Mm-hmm. Is there a particular method or...
Yeah, but, well, I think it's like, for example, tonight you think you're listening to someone who's speaking, and this is literally correct. But what is happening in your mind is different from what is happening in mine. The knowledge that you will go home with is not the one I came with. It's the one you're producing right now. So it's yours. Spinoza has a very interesting phrase about this. He says, you cannot listen to a philosopher without becoming a philosopher. It's not possible, because if you understand what I'm saying, you're producing it by yourself. So I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it for you. You are not receiving it passively. So this was the second book on interactions. As you can see, it was a happy interaction. It was the theory of how really learning and teaching work together. Mm-hmm. And then the third book went back to conflicts. And this is the Quarrel book.
And this is the last book just published in Turkish.
So we were back to something that was very pure, because the hypothesis was as follows. If you take two people who, for example, are in love with each other or are part of a family and they want that the family, you know, feels okay, everybody should be fine in the family. So they are, I would say, they have good intentions, the ones towards the others. But eventually something happens that introduces a disturbance or disorder, and then little by little a quarrel starts, and then you expected, I don't know, a happy birthday party or a Christmas party or whatever, or you know, your love weekend in Venice or whatever, and in spite of the agents, something happens within the interaction that can be autonomous. So the reason why I thought the quarrel was a philosophical object is precisely for that reason, that in a quarrel, if you start with the idea that both people have good intentions, the one toward the other, then you have a very pure, autonomous interaction. You can study and learn how to deal with, while you know you don't need to blame anybody, either the other or yourself, because it's between the two of you that this thing has been happening, I would say.
Yeah, but it's hard to dance. Like this dance is hard to manage. It's easy to blame, easy to have this accusation part or defending part when there is quarrel or conflict.
Yeah, it's true. We blame a lot the others, and sometimes we blame a lot ourselves. And I think one of the main purpose of the book is precisely to let go of this idea like, oh, this is so stupid, like this quarrel shouldn't have happened. No, no, because we know, we have precisely with the butterfly effect or with complex theory, we know how to describe properly what is going on. So you shouldn't blame yourself and think, oh, I was stupid. Nobody is stupid, like things happen for causes, except causality today is not what it used to be. And with new tools, you learn to describe new things. So for example, I would say a family dinner is extremely unstable because there are many people around and they have a history together. So if you say, oh, I shouldn't have said, like, I don't know, the meat is too strong or the vegetables are overcooked, and, oh, you know, I shouldn't have been pissed off by the uncle who said something that was, you know, I don't know, maybe inaccurate or... So the reason why we blame ourselves is that we always attribute what we say or what we do to an individual that would be theoretically totally free of their reaction. But it's not exactly like this. Like, there are many interactions going on and they all go in circles. So you receive something that you resent or interpret as a violence, it will make you feedback in terms of violence, you know. So going away from this idea of a pure freedom that would be responsible, or better, accountable for every act, you start to let go of a moral approach to all our relationships, and you start to look at the leverage points, which is where in the situation I can really kind of try to change something very small that might make the whole system go into a different direction. So this was really the purpose of this work, that to, I would say, to leave in the background the moral judgment we permanently bring back in the middle of all our interactions, and let something appear that is the complexity and the chaotic nature of the interactions we have. From then, it's easier to move on because you understand where you can actually be active in not exactly solving the problems, but navigating the conflicts.
Yeah, in the book, you are saying that it's nearly impossible not to build these moral courts in our relationships when we have conflicts with someone or with something, that we are always looking for who is responsible for this. So, I mean, we were talking about it, right? So conflicts, basically, they always produce pain.
If you think of an accident, but literally an accident, like, you know, I don't know, we went out together and I forgot the umbrella. And it's raining now. And, you know, you're not happy because it was for me to take the umbrella, I forgot the umbrella. Let's take a bigger accident. We're driving, you told me, no, you shouldn't look, for the, I don't know, the music you want, let me handle it. And while I'm doing it, boom, I have a car accident. And you really think, I told you. And so I'm not happy. Because this is serious, it's more dangerous, all right? So when this type, and so it can be smaller, it can be bigger, it can be more painful, it can be less painful. But the situation is always the same. You have a system of interactions, both in each individual. I consider every individual is a system of interactions. And as I said about Spinoza, you put two or more individuals together, they form an even more complex system. It's extremely complex. So you won't be able to describe everything in there. It's just too complex. Actually, Henri Poincaré had a fantastic sentence about this. It's like, I'm not capable of explaining the whole universe, and that's better, you know? Okay, and you know he's the founder of chaos theory. So chaos theory considers it's going to be easier to consider that some reactions are sensitive to the initial conditions. You cannot list all the initial conditions, like, yes, maybe the weather forecast was bad, you said it, but the person was busy with something else, and this is the reason why he or she forgot the umbrella. But then it's raining, and the reason it's raining is, or you're pissed off because it's raining, is because you have washed your hair the very morning. If it had been the day after, you wouldn't have been so upset. So you see, there are so many factors that you cannot foresee them, and you cannot avoid what I call accidents. Now, when an accident occurs, you have two ways of looking at it. Either you consider it's only an accident and we can, what we call in physics, frustrate it. So it is there, but it doesn't have to produce any effects. Like, you forgot the umbrella, never mind. It's raining on my hair, never mind. We'll survive. So this is a way to, but you do it only if you have the conditions for it, If it's your car that you've been saving money to buy, and the person is, trying to make the super music mix while he's driving, and you have an accident, you have all the conditions are there for you to be upset. But the reason why you will actually be upset and take on the accident to really explore, for example, anger, is necessarily because there was what I call a breach. Your system is ready to respond to this type of accident. Actually, it's waiting for it. So I guess you will all accept that nobody is perfect, right? Well, our imperfections are waiting for their time to come. They are like chasing them. They are just like these, fishermen on the Galata Bridge. They are there and they just wait for the right accident to come. And then they fish it. Like, right, this is exactly what I was waiting for, to get seen. Because these imperfections we have in us want to be seen, because once they are explored, they will open us to new directions, new perspectives. This is why I consider them as breaches. A breach in a wall makes it fragile, but it's also the place where you can see through.
Basically, they want to change. That's why they want to be seen?
Actually, the whole system is suffering from its incoherencies or imperfections. So it tends to explore them. So it tends to choose partners, for example, that will explore them. Before he died, I had a phone call with Frans de Waals, who was a fantastic ethologist. I think in Boston, it was his last position. And I wanted to check with him, with the monkeys, whether the idea that we choose our partners for positive reasons was right, because I was challenging this very idea in the book. And so he confirmed what I felt, like, no, we don't choose anybody because he's educated or gentle or because she's pretty or whatever. Rich? Not even that. We don't choose our partners. We associate breaches, like we know from inside that there is something between us that will help us move along. Like, we are going to do some path together. And this path means his breaches and my breaches are going to be a match to explore each other. Which is why also I wrote, like, to love each other perfectly is to hurt each other perfectly. Hurting each other perfectly means you can't avoid exploring the breaches of each other, but you don't need to maximize the suffering. It's going to hurt a little bit. It can hurt a lot, and there can be lots of cries and tears around it. But this is also one of my discoveries while I was writing the book. No suffering is necessary. So it's like you don't need to suffer to evolve, but no suffering is meaningless. Once you suffer, you have the opportunity to explore it. I'm sorry, it sounds a little bit like masochist or a bit pessimistic, but actually it's on the contrary. It's the idea that any type of quarrel, whether it's superficial or it's very deep, is an opportunity to move on and go deeper in our own knowledge, self-knowledge and knowledge of the others. So the interaction is really something that helps us, I would say, explore human reality differently. Now, maybe you want me to go back to the tribunal thing.
Yeah, maybe. But also before that, I forgot to say something in the beginning of the event, which was this is also open to any kind of interactions. You can join, contribute, ask questions whenever you want.
The reason why we fear pain so much is precisely because it goes along with fear. When we hurt, we're scared. If you get to disconnect the two of them, you will hurt differently. It will be a different experience. So pain is basically disorder in a system, because by definition a system is organized. So if you introduce disorder in the system, it will be experienced as pain. Once you realize that, you will see that the disorder tends to contaminate the whole system if the system doesn't have the means to calm it down. So what happens? If the system thinks like, I cannot handle this, this is going wrong, and I can't do anything about it because it's the other person's fault. Because if he is or she is the one who's responsible for this disorder, so I need you to stop what you're doing, but the person is not in position to stop what he or she is doing. So the disorder increases. So your impression of being overwhelmed increases. And the more you're overwhelmed, the more you're actually actively letting go of your own agency. And the more you do that, the more you think the other person is responsible. So to reclaim your agency, you will need to let go of the idea that the other is responsible. I'm not saying he or she is not. I'm saying you need to look at how active you are in the situation so that you stop letting all your agency go, you reclaim it, and you realize, you ask yourself then, what can I do? And maybe you're going to leave, because maybe the other person is actually toxic to you, and maybe that's what you need, more distance. But how will you, you just asked it, how will you find the right distance if you don't locate yourself? If you forget that you are part of the situation? So really, so the problem of the dynamics of pain is that it might take away your own agency within the situation, and taking the agency back doesn't mean that the pain will go. Especially when we're talking about physical pain, which is another of my inquiry fields. But the important point for now is just to accept that it is possible to put into brackets the moral judgment that refers to the other people's responsibility, and because you don't need it now, it will take away your agency, and what you need is to understand how active and where you're active, so that you can kind of drive your own force, you know, which is why I speak so much about navigating.
Yeah.
Yes?
I think it's about choosing which kind of pain do you like to be, not like to be, but do you prefer to be interacted with? So sometimes the pain is coming from inside, it's always like that. But when you realize that if you are close to your, I don't know, how can I say, close to your emotion, let's say, or your shadows, let's say, I don't know, the parts that they're there in the dark. So the pain is coming from there maybe, and it's always there, and something can just pop it up. And it can be the life itself always. So if you realize it, then you can be, you can feel the fear, but at the same time you can just recognize your pain. It was always there from the beginning, so it's a really familiar feeling. So maybe you can just stay in it and just be not fearless, but with the fear you can just observe it. But you have to detach from this pain, from your not your conscious, but the part of yourself from this pain.
Interesting.
So you have to be familiar with your pain, let's say, core pain. But also there are some pains that you cannot control, like physical pains, accidents, and the other accidents, which is not physical. But the core pain is always the same, I think. So you can always just turn it back to your core pain, core pain. So you will just, if you can recognize it, you can deal with it, and you can just choose if you want to be, like, if you want to stay or go. What is staying or going? Is it running, or is it fighting? Is it necessary to fight? Let's say, is it fighting for you? So this is very important to understand that which kind of pain is it, like at the beginning.
Thank you, thank you. Very interesting remarks you're making. I will just pick up a few terms that I really want to emphasize. It's about the choice. Maybe I will go back if you think it's relevant later, but I really like your idea of the shadow, because in any kind of what I call accident, you always have kind of two choices. One is to consider the outside accident, like, oh, this is going on. No, I didn't want it to happen that way. And you try to distribute the responsibilities, so that's his fault or that's her fault, and that's blah, blah, blah. And sometimes you blame also yourself. But from an outward point of view, from outside, or you go inside and you kind of acknowledge you're meeting your own shadow. Like, ooh, this really disturbs me. And it doesn't disturb me from outside, it's just touching what I call breaches. Like, ooh, this is, I'm not liking this. Like, I really don't like this. But instead of blaming anybody, including you, you just welcome the shadow that is coming to you and that is asking only for you to shed light on it, which is to destroy it. But to destroy it as a shadow is to help it become an individual, which is you, to become you, you know. So I think it tackles the very idea of identity, because eventually we need to accept, which is very basic, you know, but we need to accept we have no clue about who we are. The only help we can get about who we are is through others. The ones we are closest to are our mirrors. They will mirror us. Not necessarily in what we like, but precisely in what we don't like in them. What you don't like in the closest people that are around you is actually what you have to learn from, because it teaches you something that's in you and that you don't like, or more accurate, that you don't want to know about.
And also you don't know any idea, so it's in the dark.
Which is why the fear, exactly, which is why the fear has no object. Actually, it's a fear of fear, and then it's recursive, you know. So to stop it, you need to have objects, and this is why we relate to one another, to give ourselves objects and to have reasons to be, I don't know, to go through all kinds of emotions that will make us explore what we are as interactional systems, which have parts that we have no idea about. So again, I think really it's a plea for curiosity. It's being curious about what happens, and not necessarily, you know, like aesthetize the suffering or shared pain or whatever. No, it's really about being curious about whatever happens, you know. And Seneca has a very beautiful approach to this, thinking like, well, what do you think virtue is about? Virtue is about being challenged, you know. So you meet the challenge, you should be happy, like, cool, now I'm going to see if there is room in this life for virtue. And he's excited, you know, every time he meets the challenge. And you know the guy is not speaking like lightly, because he ends up opening his veins. So he knows about challenge, you know, he's seen his friends die. And when we go back to the situations we actually experience, we realize this question of shadow is important because we are absolutely terrified by the shadows we see outside. Yeah, I just had a political debate with a friend at dinner, and of course the shadows that surround us are becoming thicker and thicker, and so we know we are going to face a huge tempest. But before we go into the storm, it's nice, we should know that whatever comes will also be a reflection of something that comes from us. So hey, you can go through a storm courageously. Please read Joseph Conrad's Typhoon. It's fantastic. What a beautiful book of a fantastic captain going through a typhoon, you know, with all it implies. So, again, I think instead of fear or hope, to Spinoza, fear or hope is really the couple of emotions we balance from one to the other because of ignorance. So we should not say like, oh, instead of fear, we need hope. No, let go of both and try to focus on what you can know. And once you understand better, little by little, the system will evolve. Any other remark, question? Yeah.
So if because like the shadow aspect of Jung, for example, is a spiritual subject, but you have chosen to, you chose to use the cybernetics.
Right.
I just want to know why, first of all, why cybernetics?
Well, why I don't have an answer to why, but what I can say is that it's very powerful as a tool, you know. So basically what I did is that I introduced cybernetics in ethics, and I mixed it with chaos theory and complexity theory and something different, since you seem to be well aware of these things, which is paraconsistency. Paraconsistency is the state of a system that is not totally coherent but doesn't collapse. In classical logic, this is not possible. If you introduce something absurd in a logical system, it collapses. Everything becomes possible. If absurd is possible, like if I can fly right now, then maybe I can turn Eda into a pumpkin, you know? And then this is surrealism. From an absurdity, anything can be deduced. This is classical logic. In paraconsistent logic, we consider there are systems that incorporate absurdities and still don't collapse. So if you introduce this in cybernetics, you have systems, as I just said, that are not totally coherent. Theoretically, they should be, but it is a matter of fact that they are not, and yet they don't collapse. One of the reasons they don't is precisely what I said earlier, is that they lean on each other. So they lean on each other, and actually, leaning on each other, they don't find the support. They actually fall on each other, which is the quarrel moment. They fall on each other like, hey, I wanted you to give me support, and quite the contrary, you make me fall. In a way that will provide, as you just said, information. Because through the others, you will receive the information, especially through feedback, so they have an outward eye on you, that will give you information. The term breach has the advantage to be ambivalent. If you talk about a wound, for example, a wound is nowhere, in no situation, a good thing to have or to receive. A breach is, as I said, is something that allows you to see through a wall that is partly broken, you know? And so the idea of the breach is that it introduces disorder in the system, but this disorder is actually an order to another bigger system, which is what you need to explore once you are experiencing the breach.
About complete confusional systems, like you're giving an example. Like you use the term breach, like as a breach on the wall, but not in the breach, like in the confusional system.
Exactly. No, because if this will call a bug, and a bug freezes the machine. So the bug would be like, it would stop the dynamics that define the system. This is not how I use a breach. A breach is something you have to picture big cycles that are all moving together, you know. And the breach is a place where there is something that seems to be broken in this.
Is there always going to be another breach? Because otherwise,
Exactly.
okay, like not in one system, but in the other system. So we're going to always create other breaches. So it's not going to be a perfection anytime soon yet.
Exactly. A thinking is not produced by one single individual. It's produced in a very complex movement that involves many, many things. So, you know, we were at the end of a conversation and we were going into something a bit more difficult, which was the question of how an individual actually is built up. And it's not always in such an individualistic form as we know it. It can be very different. So what I'm trying to do right now is precisely to define the conditions for subjects that will not necessarily think of themselves as, for example, one single person. You can totally let go of this idea without going into schizophrenia. I know the building of the ego is fundamental, for example, for the balance of the psyche. So, but I've already studied this in previous books, where you can consider that there is no reason to simplify our identities into one single entity. So basically, the whole question of interactions and of the systemic approach to ethics is not only to bring cybernetics in dialogue with, I don't know, antique philosophy and dynamics and contemporary physics. It's also to make sure that we can find a way out of a binary vision that is either individualism or collectivism. So we tend to think the only way out of the individual is the collective. And I remember being in Argentina, where I have many friends, and trying to explain, you know, a collective is not something like, you know, these birds who gather together because they want to fight the cold, and they give a heat to each other, and they stay all penguins, you know, penguins being all together. This is not exactly how a collective works. A collective works the way I studied, for example, in Spinoza Teifesse. So the Spinoza clan works because they don't understand each other anymore. And so the reason why they produce ideas together is because they don't agree, but they don't really disagree either. They just speak of different perspectives. And the difference of these perspectives is actually what will help them build up totally different new ideas. And the idea of preparing for a new form of subjectivity leans on this very idea that the more tangible thing you can think of is not, for example, Eda Çaça as an individual, because this reality is way too complex. And we don't see her, we see only an image of her, we have only, you know, glimpses of moments when this reality appears. So maybe she doesn't even need Eda Çaça to live. What I'm trying to explore in my philosophy is the capacity for us to actually, that's my word, navigate interactions eventually without needing a boat. That is, to be within the ocean, knowing that, of course, there are certain things you need. You need an ego to make sure like you look on both sides of the street before you cross. That's the ego who is just being careful about what is going on around you, you know. But basically, when it becomes more complex, you need to let go. So, for example, I was about to enter this talk earlier when I was interrupted because we needed a pause for the technicians. For the ego, it's a violence because I was focused on something. So I feel like I'm, you know, woken up from a dream or something. So it's like, whoa. But that's the ego. We don't need that. What we need is to understand the reason why I'm here is because there is something happening outside of myself. I know I can sort of channel things that are going on between us and give words, put words on them. But not everything comes through me. So some come from the technician, some come from Eda, some come from you. And so if I am interrupted, my ego might be upset. But if I don't stay attached to it, I can just go on navigating. So it's really this type of flexibility that I'm trying to develop in my own life, by the way, which is something like it needs to be experimental, otherwise it doesn't really work. But the groundings, the metaphysical groundings of this approach is really, it takes time to build because it's so contrary to a certain tradition and also in opposition to what we feel is more or less the everyday life intuition. So being somehow innovative as opposed to a certain tradition and counterintuitive as opposed to a certain experience, you understand that it takes time to go into an experience that would take seriously this idea of systems and interactions on a daily basis. But that's a good example, you know, being interrupted in a moment when you think you really have the momentum is stopped, and you think, oh no, it's all ruined. Yeah, something has been stopped, but if you don't stick to the representation you had, to the image you were giving of yourself, then you can let go, and then you can gather again. It's just like a wave, you know. You gather again all the energy that was there, and you can go back to the idea again. By the way, one of the reasons this is classic cybernetics. The reason for the instability of a system it's its openness. An open system is a system that also depends on exterior factors. If you don't take these factors into account, your system will appear as unstable because it reacts to things that you are not considering as part of it. But as I said, any system is open. So all systems are unstable. If you accept this instability, then the fact of being interrupted cannot be an interruption anymore. It's not possible. It's like Seneca has, again, sorry about Seneca, but I'm translating the letters to Lucilius, so I have Seneca all over me. You point anything on my body, Seneca comes out. And so Seneca says, you can't beat the air. Why? Because if you beat the air, actually it goes around whatever comes in it, you know? And this is the very idea of what I would call a pure interactional system. Actually, most of my concepts come from fluid mechanics. Because in the fluids, you really can understand chaotic causality, for example, complex systems, and the air reacts exactly like this. You cannot interrupt it because it will always find ways to move around. Difficult thing to learn.
There was one more question, I think.
This last 50 years of the internet and social media, density of cities, constant sort of interacting with other people, not with nature, because nature that was always been there as a sort of example of chaos. Do you think that that's had a certain effect on an ability to deal with this philosophically, ethically? I mean, systems thinking tries, but it seems like it also hits this level of complexity that I don't think it seems like we're able to, both psychologically and sociologically, have been able to deal with.
Thank you, thank you. That's a very interesting question. Well, I can see the way out, which is exactly the opposite direction. We don't need to think these increasingly fast interactions. We need to focus on slower interactions of a bigger scale that are not so fast and not so small. You have mentioned a history of mankind, but our interactions don't only imply other humans. They imply lots of things, and I mentioned the air earlier. Our interaction with the air is one of the most important in our whole life, you know. We keep on pulling air in, releasing another form of air out, you know, in another mix.
That relationship with nature has been already coded into the way our brain understands it. It's sitting there dealing with it.
Absolutely.
His brain is a 4 million year old brain.
You introduced the concept of nature I didn't use. I don't know about nature. I don't know what it is, but I do know what air is. And I think, well, the new directions of my most recent thought right now is really to deal with these elements that are actually of a bigger importance and of a very large scale that leaves all our civilization in such a very tiny instant that it's not so relevant. And if you want to build the future, I don't think it's important to focus on what I would call the restricted present time. What I would call the restricted present time, by the way, you make me remember that I gave a talk about this on what is the present time to yoga teachers. Because, you know, yoga teachers, they want to go into the present. And actually, the present time they are interested in is not the present time you read in the newspaper. It's a different form of present. What it involves is a different form of presence. Being present to existence in interactions that don't have the same coordinate as, for example, 2025. May I remind you that this is a very peculiar way to count time. Like, nobody's in 2025, you know. It's just, we invented this just to locate ourselves. We are not more in 2025 than in 8,318, you know. These are just landmarks for us to locate in time. But if you don't want to locate, for example, in a human time, where do you find yourself? And that's an interesting question to ask yourself, because I think it challenges a certain level of interactions, the ones you were mentioning, like super fast interactions, interactions with unknown people on social networks, interaction, blah, blah, blah. Okay, this is a certain form of present. But if you become present to different existential coordinates, your whole life changes. What you think is relevant becomes irrelevant. It's not relevant anymore. And what you felt was secondary, or maybe, you know, it's something we don't really give importance to, becomes very important. And so this is the shift I'm working on, so that our attention, which is really what has been put into danger or crisis recently, and it's only the beginning, the attention refocuses on something that is deeper than this very fast changing present time. Because if you get fascinated or hypnotized by this present time, you'll die very soon without noticing. If you focus more on the form of presence that gives you other coordinates, for example, as part of the human species, as you mentioned, then you will think of your own body in a very different scale. Then if you feel the water, the importance of water coming through you, going out of you, and going through, I would say, its own destiny through you, through us, then again you think about a different scale. And then again the priorities will change. And there is something to be said about, I'm not talking about a simple life like, you know, in the forest and, I don't know, whatever kind of people in Amazonia you can fantasize about. No, I'm talking about the elementary things that surround you and that bring back both ecology and metaphysics to a very basic experience. And again, I think by focusing back on this experience, we get the power to balance the way the future is being built in a different direction. It's really what I'm working on. My latest book is called Parler avec sa mère, Speak with Your Mother, and it's about the scale of the mother. So you think your mother is the person who gave birth to you and maybe educated you. But this is just the ambassador. She is the ambassador of the mother. Mother is a set of functions. So there are many functions I could list that make someone a mother. Actually, we tend to impute all these functions to one single individual. But after some time you think, oh, now I'm done. I don't need like a feeding mother because I don't feed breast anymore. I eat food and now I have my own salary, so I don't need my mother to buy food for me, so I'm free. Oh, yeah? And imagine if the earth would stop producing its fruits. Do you think you would survive? You wouldn't. You need a mother. Do you think you are away from an atmospherical matrix? No, you breathe from this matrix. If you were taken from this matrix, you would die in seconds. So the idea is that the mother, the concept of the mother, or better, the mother-child relationship is a fundamental in building a new approach to what is called deep ecology. So from deep ecology, you have a different approach to, I would say, contemporary times and, artificial intelligence and so on.
Shall we go back to this theory of conflict and maybe look for the tools? What are the tools? Like freedom, for example, forgiveness that you mentioned.
All right, so the problem with forgiveness is that it has been made a prescription. Okay, so you must forgive. It's not a good idea to make it a prescription because you don't control whether you are in position to forgive or not. Why? Because forgiveness, it's basically to let go of a pain. But when you hurt, when you feel the pain, you will basically try your best to get rid of it, and if you can't, you will build your own system around it to make sure that you don't get in touch with it again. So basically, you have built something around a certain memory to make sure that nothing touches it anymore. Forgiveness means you need to get back into the core of your construction to let this go, to wash it away from your system. So it's a very difficult thing to see and to do. Why do we need to do it? Because if you don't, what you think is inactive is actually responsible for the whole architecture of your system. So it is crucial that as soon as you can, you look back and get rid of what has built this this architecture, I would say. Yeah? So we basically think that forgiveness is to erase the fault that someone made or was guilty of. Actually, what I show is that we have it's a threefold problem, at least. You need to forgive someone who did something to you. you need to forgive yourself for having placed yourself in a position to be hurt. And then you need to forgive, it's bizarre, but pain itself, to have been an experience in your life. And I would say even the fourth aspect is you need to forgive life to have made you experience this. So it's a very complex, you don't know who you are going to give your forgiveness to. And it goes in all directions. This is why it's so difficult to do. Now, what I suggest is precisely to make the vulnerabilities come together. Why? Because actually people I would say, rarely harm each other on purpose. They can do it, but it's just a
little person.
Yeah, well, actually, it can happen, but it happens for reasons that will show that actually it goes back to the same case. So I won't make this demonstration, but basically, we are extremely vulnerable in different levels. First, as I said about the individual, we don't actually perceive each other. Like we see each other, but that means we have a visual image of each other, but I don't see what you are. I just see how you look like. Well, with a little bit of training, I also see what you think. Because I see when you're like this, I see when you're like this, I see when you're like this. So this is one of the reasons why I told you it's really an interaction. If you're interested in interaction, when you speak with your audience, because you know where you are with them, you know, so you take part in this. But the first problem in human action is, I would say, awkwardness. Awkwardness is the fact that when I say something, when I do something, I have an intention, and what I actually do is generally not precisely what I wanted. We are so awkward that people who can place a ball in a goal at 20 meters are considered gods, you know? Soccer players. This is so, just to give you an idea of how awkward is the human being. Like we really, I want to say something and something else comes out of my mouth. This is the first level of vulnerability. We are vulnerable because we hardly do what we want. We intended to say or do something and something else comes out. Second point, we are ignorant of the effects of what we do. That is, I wanted to be nice and I said something. But actually, first, what came out of my mouth was not exactly what I wanted. Second, I don't control the effects of what will do what I did. Again, someone who knows Foucault will recognize something that Foucault has written, which is like, people generally know what they do, but they hardly know what they do does. So the idea is that you don't control the acts you're doing, and you don't control the effects of the acts you're doing, but then you don't control, and you don't even see, how the persons who are involved in the same situation as you experience the effects of the acts you're doing, right? This is a third level of vulnerability. And so even I could go on because I as far as I remember, there are 5. But to make it short, what we need to do to forgive is to understand on what level of vulnerability is the other person who's hurting you. Because they are probably hurting you because they are either awkward or blind or ignorant or etc. So we need to show up. This is really difficult. I think it's one of the most difficult things we have to do in life is to show up to each other. Like, this is me. Hello, this is me. I'm here. This is what I'm experiencing. Do you see me? The answer, by the way, is no. We hardly see each other, so we need lots of words and lots of time to actually perceive each other. The deepest reality, which is the like the situation of the heart, animus in Latin. It's the heart, which is the core of our relation to existence and to others, is what we have the most difficulty to perceive from the others. So, to forgive means to get to share our vulnerabilities, so that each of us, if one has hurted the other, can see where our vulnerabilities met in order to produce pain. And I finish on something that is very extraordinary and that I really love, is when vulnerabilities come together, there is something that converts. Vulnerability, as you know, or you might not know, by the way, but from the Latin, vulnerability means capacity to be wounded, literally. But the capacity to be wounded, for example, if you're naked with the right person at the right moment, you won't feel vulnerable. You will feel sensitive. You will feel responsive. And so when two vulnerabilities come together, as I said, they convert and they become sensitivity. So they become a chance. They don't, from weaknesses, they become forces, which is really what we are trying to do when we come together, when two individuals try to share something. And if every time you hurt somebody or you get hurt by somebody, you get the chance to have the opportunity to exactly see clearer in this combination of the vulnerabilities, then you will see, both together and individually, you'll be stronger. It's interesting when you think about it, and then you have to practice, and then it's a little bit different. Like, it's less exciting because, of course, it involves situations you
Well,
don't
it's
really
really
like.
hard to accept the other person as someone vulnerable, hard to see me, really understand me, and articulate himself or herself in the best way. The same for me. Like, it's hard to live like this in a way, with this perception. Maybe if, I mean, is it that one that you would like to change? The perception of us in terms of...
I like your resistance. Yeah, she objects. I like your resistance because you need to understand we don't have a choice. It's not like, it's difficult, I don't want to be generous. Why do I have always to be the one to, understand the other and open myself and to my own vulnerability, etc.? If you don't do that, you will make yourself suffer. You will deliberately take away your own agency, and you will get stuck actively in a position where you will be in pain. And you will blame somebody else for something you're actively doing. So you don't have a choice. And this is really what helps me. I mean, I give it as a tool to you guys. It's like, what helped me is to understand you don't have a choice. It's not like, do I choose to be generous or not? It's rather like, if you don't do it, you will
suffer.
You will be punished by yourself. So stop doing it. Stop doing that to yourself. Now you open and you wash yourself. You clean yourself from all this shit. No, it's important. I mean, we tend to value pain as if it was a treasure. We don't want our pains to be taken away from us. We want them to be acknowledged and seen from the others. There's a point where I see where it's relevant. For example, in families where you have incest, for example, it's absolutely crucial that the pain felt by the girl, for example, is taken into account by the whole family, so that the whole system can actually support her. If she's isolated, she's going to collapse, and this is a second tragedy on top of the incest in itself. So the sharing of the pain is an important moment, but the sharing of the pain is meant to wash it away. And I feel the more I work on it, the more I feel that pain is the definition of a waste. So literally, it's excrement. It's something, it comes along with certain experiences, but it's not something you should hold on to. You need to let go of it, you know. Babies, they tend to offer it to the mother. It can be an offering. It's like, look, I did this, you know, and they are very happy to give it. And at a certain point, you need to understand that this is nice, but let's just like get rid of it. And the pain is the same thing. It's like you need to understand it comes into our lives because of the many reasons I said. Like, we are systems, these systems are very complex. When disorder comes in, then it will be painful because it needs the system to kind of reset and to evolve. And this change will involve some pain. But once we said that, we need to accept that pain is just a waste. So once it's been there and you wash away. We tend to think freedom is to decide or to choose freely for one's destiny or direction. But I feel we have here a model, precisely thanks to the geography, of a freedom that will only depend on the way you focus, you drive your attention. And depending on how you drive your attention, you will see that the events around you will change. Because again, attention is in interaction with the interactions it observes. That was a complex sentence. Did you follow? So the idea is, in any point of time, you have so many currents going through you that you're in a moment of multistationarity. Everything is happening at the same time. All the possible things are happening at the same time. But one of them will eventually be selected, not because you choose it freely, but because your freedom lays in the way you orient your attention. And your attention will help some interactions grow and will leave other interactions in the back. This is really one of the main points where freedom articulates with determinism. It's because once you understand that you don't need free will, meaning the capacity to choose between left and right without any cause pushing you either in one direction or the other, this is one model of freedom based on the freedom of the will. So it's based on the idea that you voluntarily choose what you choose. What I tend to prefer is a version of freedom where you actually taken by so many currents that it's impossible to decide or to know, to foresee where you're going to go. And where you're actually going to go depends on the focus of your attention. So if you favor one interaction, it will become what I call the leading interaction. And the leading interaction, as you understand, takes the lead, which means it is responsible for the changes that will occur in the situation. I'm sorry, it was a very complex answer, but it's reframing freedom is one of the core problems of the philosophy I'm trying to articulate. And I can see we all continue to depend so much on this idea of free will, and it's so difficult to explain. It goes a little bit with physics, so you need a little bit of physics to grasp properly what I'm talking about, but it's really the idea that freedom is not opposed to determinism, it is within a certain line of cause and effects within movements that are already happening, that your freedom is being defined. I know it's difficult, but it's interesting. You take some time to think about it. Yes, please.
You mentioned that we should put an effort and do anything for the sake of the continuation of this interactional system. But maybe the total termination of the system will be more beneficial to us. How do we decide on that? Like,
Exactly, to another system, of course.
Like, is there a like step by step, like not step by step, but maybe at some point you have to terminate all this interaction system. Like, how do we decide on that? Because you said that we should put effort every time. Every time you have to look into yourself and go through the painful thing.
Yeah.
But sometimes you have to like stop and
Exactly,
terminate it.
like it's a breakup, for example.
Yeah, how do you decide on that?
You don't get to choose. Again, it's interesting that your question already goes back into the idea that you will decide like sovereignly, like you will choose. No, it's not like this. It's like at a certain point, it will be unbearable for the system to stay in connection with the other system, for example. Yeah. So when the crisis is big, the system is ripe, I would say. So normally it happens when the system is ripe. In certain conditions, the other system can impede the other to go out, and then the person is actually stuck. And this is what we see, I don't know, in all forms of abuses, you know, because one system needs out and the other actually stops it from going away and then destroys it little by little. So basically, it's not, you know, the way we refer to our everyday life is so absurdly based on the free will that we commit many, many mistakes. Actually, again, if you understand that everything that happens depends on longer movements, that you're not choosing, like for example, for a breakup, since you chose that example, you know that the day you decide to say, look, it's over, it's because it's been dying for months or weeks, or, you know, and then when it's ripe. So my answer is, of course, there are moments when systems collapse and they're gone, like the Roman Empire is gone. Actually, well, you can still feel the influence of the limits of the Roman Empire, but still it's gone. And some of our love stories are gone, it's done, it's the past. It will never come back again. But I add one thing which comes from the karma concept. Karma in Sanskrit means action. The idea of karma is that any action we perform has effects, except you don't know at what scale. So of course, if I'm thirsty, I drink, it heals my thirst. That's one effect. But maybe there are actions that have effects that you don't master and that are on a very long period. It's very interesting because it's totally rational. If you consider that, then the collapse of a system is necessarily concomitant to, I would say, the absorption of the elements of this system into another one. So if you look at it that way, death doesn't really exist because nothing goes to pure nothingness. It's just that systems reorganize themselves permanently. And so precisely in the mother book, at the end, there is a chapter called Where Do Mothers Go When They Die? And when they die, they actually just migrate from a certain, that's the case for any individual. Any human individual, being a system, finite, when it dies, actually migrates to another organization level. This is basically how systems die, you know. It just dies at a certain scale, but it doesn't vanishes. Yeah, sorry, you make me go into high metaphysics, you know. I don't know, I follow you.
I would like to ask a question. What you have been saying today, tonight, was more on the side of ethics and a collective ethics and a personal ethics. And as far as I understand, you want to externalize subjectivity and subjective experience. You want to externalize subjective experience into a network of relations which are contingent, and that
Aleatory. Okay.
yes,
Aleatory.
contingent and aleatory, and that seems to me that you have a certain ontological assumption behind that. So I would like to know what that assumption is, because it doesn't seem to be very close to Spinoza's metaphysics. Not that I think you'd have to be Spinozistic, but given your background and everything, I wanted to inquire about that.
Okay. I think you gave a fair description of what I'm trying to do. Externalize subjectivity, I think I would prefer the term dissenter. Because of course, if you externalize, you suppose that there was an interiority, and I want to break out of this interiority to make it more open, and so then it becomes externalizing. I understand that, except that I think this description still supposes that there is an interiority to flee away from, which I think is correct but imaginary. There is no interiority to flee from, but there is a center. We like, I don't know what Maxime Rovere is, and I don't really care. But I know this is the coordinates where I approach whatever interaction I am in. So there is a center. And the question is what do I get if I can move away from this center? And I think what we get is so big, it's so important, then that it's really the fundamental of my effort. So it's not really externalize, because externalize would also suggest that it could become objective. It could be objectively studied. It would be out in the open. Whereas, and there I think this is what you have kind of guessed, I feel more, paradoxically, I feel more sympathetic with phenomenology, which is quite the contrary to what we just said, which is really the philosophy of the lived experience. So if you take phenomenology as the philosophy of a lived experience and you decenter it, you have something that is difficult to describe, because normally you can't do this. It's not possible. It's not possible. Like, precisely because phenomenology was a philosophy that was built as a reaction against the objectivation of the world. And the phenomenologists, and I think about Merleau-Ponty or Husserl, were people who said, no, look, it's interesting to study scientifically whatever we can, but we need to take into account the fact that there is a lived experience that has its own dimension. So we need to study this too, and this is only accessible to literature and philosophy and, let's say, humanities in general, but not to the objectivation of sciences. This is really the basics of phenomenology. So if I take phenomenology out, well, I break the fundamental basis of it. But what I'm doing is precisely that I make the lived experience something that doesn't depend anymore on a unified subjectivity.
So are you tokenized in a way?
Yeah, well, exactly. That's
Are you tokenizing the
existence.
the existence? Yes. The
That's-
consciousness.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Because you don't need, without using either the individual or the subject or the person as the main element, but the interaction which is smaller. Now you say, don't you think you kind of atomize the reality? And I would say yes. In that sense, I feel very much aligned with atomistic philosophy. I mean, going back to Epicurus and Democritus and these guys, it's really the very idea that reality. But this is the new thing. This is where phenomenology comes into play. It's what they did with the physical world, which was to suppose that maybe the physical world was made of small particles, is what I am trying to do with the phenomenological world.
Well,
Thank you so much.
thank you, Maxime. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for coming today.
Thank you for this exchange. Thank you for your quality.